Hi, everyone. My name's Caitlin. I'm an Otago computer science grad, and I'm going to be talking about what it's like working in the tech industry, and then also some kind of advice, description of how to do interviewing to get a job in the tech industry as well. So this presentation is aimed at computer science students who are thinking about becoming programmers in industry and want to know like how to get those jobs and what they are. So I'm first going to talk about what companies I've worked at so far, just to give you some context of where I'm coming from. And then I'll go into detail of what my current job is like by talking about the most common tasks I do each day. And then the whole rest of the talk is about how to apply for programming jobs, since this is for people who are applying for jobs soon. So I'll talk about common types of programming job interview, and then I have one specific piece of advice at the end for programming job applications. So about me, I graduated a while ago from the Otago CS department. My first job was an internship at Google in their Sydney office. I was doing pretty just normal programming, but with a slight focus on performance testing. My graduate job was working at a bank, National Australia Bank, as a Python developer. And then I moved to a company called Xero, which some of you might have heard of. They recruit a lot of grads, but it's a website and they make business accounting software. They have a backend in the cloud, so using AWS, and they have a few thousand employees and about 2 million customers. So it's a big company divided into teams. So I'm going to talk about what teams I was on. So the first team I was in for a little over a year was the SRE team, or Site Reliability Engineering. So a lot of larger tech companies have an SRE team, and the responsibility of SRE is to make sure whatever product you make is available and responsive. So in Xero's case, it's a website. So we were making sure the website is up and that it responds fast when users are like clicking around. So in this team, my main projects were performance projects. So we would find an area of the site that's really slow and try to figure out why it's slow. So is it the application? Is it the servers it's running on? Is it the database queries? Stuff like that. And then hopefully fix it, not just find out why. And then after that, I moved to the job I've kind of had for the longest, which was a backend developer. And I was in that role for 5 years, which is a really long time. So by backend developer, I just mean I was writing software, but I didn't do any front-end visual stuff. So no JavaScript, no HTML, nothing like that. And I was in a team of programmers working quite closely together. And we were what's known as an internal services team, which basically means we made tools like libraries and APIs, and we made them for other programmers in Xero, like other product teams in Xero to use. So we were making software for our own colleagues rather than making directly stuff that the actual website users would use. And then a few weeks ago, I actually left Xero, sad to leave, but I've gone to work for a small startup called Upstock. I've only been there a month, so I won't say really anything about it in this presentation, but I'm very excited to be there. And I'm doing something pretty similar to my last one. So disclaimer, this talk is supposed to be helpful to, general students getting jobs as programmers, but as you can see, it's not super representative of all the different types of job you can have. For instance, I've only ever done back-end stuff, and I know a lot of people are really interested in front-end. So it's better to see this next section as an example of a career you can have, rather than like saying your career will be like this or your job will be like this. Cool. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk about, as a backend developer, what are the most common tasks I do in a day. So the first one is programming. Not a huge shock. The thing I do most often is programming. I probably spend 30 or 40% of my time on this. So I'm not going to talk about what programming is because you'll know already, but I will emphasize that I don't just mean the typing part. I'm also including things like research, reading, Stack Overflow, troubleshooting bugs, all the kind of side stuff like that. And in particular, one part of programming that I do a lot that I never did as a student is reviewing code that other people have written. I would say this is like half of the time I spend programming, so maybe 10 or 20% of my job total. So this is normally through pull requests, which is where someone will send the team a change they want to make, and we all check it independently for things like inefficient code, confusing class structures, security concerns, maybe, and other stuff like that. The second most common thing I do is attend meetings. These vary a lot. Sometimes you'll go through a period of like many meetings and then there's no meetings for a while. But I think on average, maybe it's like 20%, or it was at 0. The most common type of meeting we have is what I'm calling a planning meeting. By that, I just mean, you're in a team of people working on projects together. You want to meet and talk about how you're going to do them. So we would, meet and talk about how we're going to implement something. If anyone's stuck on something, can we help them? So just exactly the same as when you're working on a group project at Polytech or uni. So these aren't necessarily like super official meetings. We're just like working together. And then the other type of meeting we have is kind of more your stereotypical stock image meetings. These are like process meetings where we're not talking about technical issues probably. Instead, we're talking more about meta problems, like how are we functioning as a team? Could we work faster? Could we work to a higher quality? How could we do those things? And also, what type of projects do we want to work on for our own interest a little bit, but mostly what are the business priorities? Like what do we need to be doing to be useful? And these meetings are generally more boring. People generally don't like them as much, but they can be really useful. So you got to do them. And then the last main type of thing I do is customer support. So by this, I mean, once you've written the code for your new service and deployed it and people are using it, then inevitably it will break for them and they will have problems using it and we have to help them. So there are two types of support. One is internal support. So this is specific to that backend internal team I was in at Xero. So because we made tools for other developers to use rather than the customer, when those other devs have problems using our stuff or questions about how to use them, they can ask us directly, like just walk over and ask us. So it's kind of like customer support, but all the customers are themselves programmers. So all the problems they would run into were always super interesting. I really enjoy internal support. And then the second type of support is when our services actually do affect customers, the users on the site. So normally how this would happen is that one of our tools would break, and then the devs who were using that tool, their tools would break, and the whole site would often go down. Was it wasn't common to happen, but it was a common thing for us to address when we had an on-call problem. So you have to be able to respond to that 24 hours a day, because if the site goes down, management doesn't like that. So because there's this kind of constant pressure to keep the site up, how we dealt with that was that we would go on call. So kind of lower stakes, but similar to how doctors and midwives do, we would take shifts of being the on-call dev. And when you're on call, you have to have your phone on you at all times. And if something goes wrong, you get a phone call and you have to come into work. So the actual calls themselves are pretty rare, but when they do happen, they take up a lot of time because you have to first fix the immediate problem. And then after that, like the next day, you have to document what happened. And then you have to think about it. Like, is there any way we could have prevented that from happening? And then you might change your product longer term to be a bit more resilient. And so that whole kind of long process takes ages, even though the calls themselves are hopefully quick. And then the other thing about going on call is that when you're involved in an active incident, so when the site is down and you're in the team responsible for bringing it back up, it can be stressful because you have time pressure and there's not really anything else in the job that has time pressure like that. But it can also be quite exciting and fun. So what that means is that even when we're not having a lot of incidents, we're often thinking about on call a lot. Like it takes up kind of emotional time or emotional weight or something. It's a big deal in the job, even when things are working pretty well on the site. And that's it. That probably covers 80%, I said, of how I spend my time. So if that sounds fun to you, I recommend applying for a job like this one. And the good news is this is not an unusual role at all. It's pretty standard for being a backend dev. So that is probably achievable for you. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the next part of the talk, which is about applying for programming jobs. I'm going to start with the common types of job interview. There are a lot of different types of job interview in IT, and it's not uncommon that you'll be called back to a company for 2 or 3 or 4 different types of interview, even as a grad or even sometimes as an intern. So you might encounter like a variety of these different interviews. So it's good to know like which one you're doing at any given time. So the first type of interview or the first step in a job application you might have is a take-home test. So this is where you don't meet anyone from the company, but they'll probably email you a programming problem or a quiz to fill out at home. And the content of these are really varied from company to company. So it's pretty hard to prepare for them. And not always, but normally, the reason companies do them is because they have so many good applicants for a position that they can't meet everybody in person that they want to meet. So if you're doing a lot of this type of interview and not having a lot of luck, just know that that's normal. In that sense, these are probably the hardest interviews that you'll ever do in terms of how many people the company is intending to cut in that round. So yeah, interviewees don't really like these, but sometimes for cost reasons, companies like have to do this. So yeah. Okay, so slightly nicer interviews. The first type of in-person interview you'll probably have is what I'm calling an intro. This is where you would meet someone from the company and just kind of chat to them for like 5 or 10 minutes. This is probably the type of interview you'll do if you go to a job fair. But even outside of job fairs, this might be the first interview you get with a company, and it would probably be over the phone. So common questions they'll ask are, where are you studying and what's your favorite class and why? Might be other like variations of that, but those are super common. And the questions they're asking kind of have 2 purposes. So the first purpose would be like, where are you studying? This is to break the ice. If they're asking you questions like that don't seem like they should matter for the job, like it's not like that company is trying to hire people who studied at a particular institution. It's because they're not evaluating you yet. Basically, they're just trying to make sure you feel comfortable in the interview, and they've probably been told to like open up with a couple unrelated questions. So I found this really weird when I was doing it, but that's probably why. And honestly, it doesn't matter much what responses you give here. Just be yourself. And then the main kind of evaluating questions they'd be asking you are things like, what's your favorite class and why? And they're trying to check kind of your level of enthusiasm, what you liked about your degree and what you didn't. Because if you've just finished a computer science degree, that's a lot more broad. Like it covers a much greater variety of stuff than the average job. So they want to know what specific stuff you liked about the degree so they can figure out what role they can offer that has some of that for you, so you'll like it and you'll stay. So for example, a grad whose favorite paper had a lot of graphics would probably enjoy really different jobs to a grad whose favorite paper had a lot of robotics. And so they're probably going to ask you a lot of questions about this and try and get some specific stuff about what you liked and didn't like. So what I recommend for anyone's approach to answering those is just like be genuine and frank about what you liked and didn't, and it'll help them to kind of place you into whatever role would be most appropriate for you. You don't have to worry about sounding like what topics might sound like impressive or something, or showing them your technical skills at that point. You'll be showing them your technical skills later in the technical interviews, but for now, they just want to know where like what roles they might want to be placing you in. Cool. So the next type of interview is a soft skills interview. So this is where they're trying to find out, or the interviewer is trying to find out what your personality is like and what it would be like to work with you. It's basically a guarantee that you'll have to answer some soft skills questions at some point as a grad. This is very common. So it's definitely worth thinking about and preparing for, especially if you're nervous. So probably what they'll ask you about is how you like working with people. So for example, they might ask you, do you like working with people? And this is because in tech, there's a really wide variety of how social the jobs are. So in some roles, you'll be the sole dev responsible for a particular product, and you'll be expected to get things done mostly on your own. So that suits people who prefer to work alone. And in other roles, you'll be working with a close-knit team, and you'll spend most of your day working with them and talking to them. So again, the most important thing with this question is to answer it honestly and frankly, because it'll help everyone to sort you out into a role or a company that has a working style you like. Yeah. And then if the role involves working with other people, they'll ask you to give an example of a time you've worked with other people and how you found it. So talk about a group project you've worked on is the normal question. And what they want to hear is they want to hear about a time when you were working with other people and something challenging happened. So when there was some kind of personality clash, or you as a group had to adjust to work well together. This is a really common question to ask grads. And if you want to get ready for it, you can totally pick an example in advance that you're going to talk about and practice describing it. And the key thing here is don't feel like you have to say, I've never had any issues working with people. I always find it really easy. because yeah, I mean, issues on group projects are super normal, and not a red flag at all for the interviewer. So they won't judge you for having a problem. They'll be really interested if you have had a problem to hear how you thought about the problem and how you responded to kind of fix it. Yeah. Okay, so technical interviews. There are lots of different types of technical interview, but the most common one for grads is that you'll just get asked to describe how you implemented an assignment at uni. So I almost guarantee you will get asked this if you have to do a technical interview at all as a grad. So again, if you want to prepare for this question, I would recommend picking the assignment in advance and practice describing it. How you want the description to go is you want to briefly talk about the requirements and then kind of delve in more on any implementation choices you made and why you made them, anything that was particularly challenging, and anything you particularly enjoyed about the project are the main three things that they probably want to hear. Another type of interview is a whiteboard interview. So this is the most like stereotypical programming interview. This is where you're given an algorithms problem, like implement merge sort, and you have to write a solution out on a whiteboard. These are much less common than just talking about your past project, but they do happen. And I have some advice for them a bit later. So I'll come back to them. The next interview I'm calling a programming interview. What I mean is this is like a whiteboard interview, except instead of a whiteboard, you have an actual computer and you have to write some code on the computer in the interview. So if the company chose an actual like programming interview with a computer rather than a whiteboard one, it's most likely because they aren't only interested in your algorithm skills, they also want to check that you seem familiar with the programming language itself. So can you get a piece of code to compile? Can you use the IDE and use its shortcuts and stuff like that? So it's a good idea if you have one of these to practice with that environment in advance, and they should let you know what it's going to be. And then also because they're assessing this other stuff rather than only algorithms, that means that the actual programming problem they're going to give you will be easier than what you'd get in the average whiteboard interview. Yeah. So whiteboard and programming interviews, I think for most people are the most intimidating interviews that we do. But if you do have an interview like this, the good news is they are really, really easy to prepare for because there are so many resources online. So if you Google, practice whiteboard, practice programming interview questions, there are millions of results. And my recommendation for a nice place to start is a book called Cracking the Coding Interview by Gail Lockman McDowell. This is good because it has tips and then it has a lot of practice problems, which is kind of the most important thing for getting ready for these questions, is to practice doing similar ones. Yeah, so that's my advice. But I mean, all the books on this are good as well. Okay, and then the last type of interview, or a technical interview, is where they might ask you some questions like you'd get on an exam. So for example, I once got asked, what's the difference between a process and a thread? Yeah, kind of stuff like that. So these are harder to prepare for because the questions are kind of computer science general knowledge. They might be about anything. But the good news is the best preparation for these questions is getting a degree in computer science. So you guys are probably already doing that, or information science, or what, any of those kind of degrees. Cool. So those are the main types of technical interviews, and they might seem really different because the formats are different, but the interviewers are looking for the exact same thing in all of them. They want to see that you can approach a problem methodically, and they want to see that you can communicate what your approach is to other people, so to them, the interviewer. So because of that, I have the same advice for all these different types of interview, which is that you shouldn't worry too much about whether you're getting the answer actually correct. For the interviewer, it's actually not super important whether you get the exact right thing, whether your code really would compile on the whiteboard or something like that. Instead, they'll be paying a lot more attention to whether you're approaching the problem methodically, whether you're thinking it through carefully as opposed to just, trying around random stuff. And they'll be paying a lot of attention to how you're communicating back to them, whether you can describe what you're doing clearly, because that's really important for someone you're going to work with, that they can communicate to you what they're doing. So for example, in the whiteboard or programming interviews, it's conventional to talk through what you're doing as you're writing the solution. So literally, as you're writing, you're supposed to say, and now I'm going to put a for loop because whatever reason, or I'm going to put this next bit in a method because I would want to split it out into its own unit, or things like that. And if you are going through your solution and then you get stuck, or you get to a point where you have a question or you're not sure what to do, you should not see that as a bad thing. You should just talk to the interviewer about that. So say, oh, now I'm making a decision here. I'm not sure. Ooh, I just got a notification that my internet is unstable. So someone let me know if I cut out. But anyway, if you're stuck, let them know I'm making this decision. Here are the pros and cons of different things I might do. I'm not sure which one to pick. And that will let the interviewer know that you recognize those pros and cons, you know where the important decision is, and they probably won't mind if you don't have a super strong opinion either way. They're more interested to see that you know what the crux of the problem is. Yeah. And then, for a quiz question interview, it's just the same. So if you don't know the exact answer, what's the difference between a process and a thread, then you could talk them through your best guess. You say, I don't know the answer, but if I had to guess, I would say this for these reasons. And, if your reasoning is good, then that's just as good an answer as if you happened to know the exact thing off the top of your head, like you happen to have it memorized. And it's certainly way better than just giving up and assuming you're getting a 0 for that question. There's no reason you should get a 0 for any technical question just because you don't know the exact perfect right answer. Yeah. So in general, you can think of it like companies aren't trying to hire the person that knows the most stuff. They're more looking for things like enthusiasm, curiosity, problem-solving skills, and communication skills. And that's especially true for grads, because when they hire you, they're going to tell you all the stuff about their particular domain anyway. Yeah. Okay, and for my last section, I wanted to give a specific piece of advice about how to make a good programming job application. And it is, you should make a GitHub profile. So I'm not sure what version control tools you guys are familiar with, so I'll just super quickly explain what I mean by this. So Git is a version control tool, so it's for recording different versions of pieces of software. And GitHub is a website where you can upload that software as a backup, and you can make that public, and other people can go see it. So if you have Git, which is free, and a GitHub account, which is also free, you can put any projects you've worked on into Git, upload them to GitHub, and then you can put a link to your GitHub on your CV, and interviewers will be able to go and see the code you wrote. So this is roughly what it would look like. This is my personal GitHub profile, which doesn't have too much on it, but just to show you like what the format is. So each of these repositories is a coding project I've worked on, and it's possible to click into them and you can see all of the code and all of the versions as it was being developed. So people reviewing job applications, speaking as someone who has reviewed job applications, we love GitHub profiles because it means you can go look at the person's code directly, get a really good sense of their strengths and what they're focusing on in their development. So what kind of projects should you put on the profile? You can put any projects you've worked on at uni or Polytech, especially ones you've enjoyed or ones you're proud of. Maybe you didn't enjoy them, but you think that then they came out really good. But it doesn't have to be only uni stuff or Polytech stuff. If you have any personal projects, you can put those up too. So this is kind of a long-winded way of saying anything you want to show the interviewer, you can put it on the profile who wrote it. And then lastly, what can you do to make your profile, your projects look good to someone looking at your CV? So the first thing is, of course, the harder you work on the... Thanks. Okay, thanks for waiting, everyone. I don't know why the computers have betrayed me. So, yes. I'm not sure where I was, but I was basically just saying that if you have a GitHub profile and it has a repo in it, the better the code looks, the more the interviewers will like it, which is actually kind of obvious, but it's not the only thing reviewers are looking for. They will also be looking for a README. So why do they want a README? Because this is the first time they've seen your software, and they've probably seen it like together with 30 other CVs, and a lot of them have GitHub links, and it's hard to kind of keep all the different repos straight if a lot of people have code you want to look at. So it's really important to have a README because otherwise it just gets too confusing. But it doesn't have to be massive. You don't need much stuff on there. You just want to cover what is the domain of the project. So like it's a calculator, it's a weather predictor, like the topic. You want a brief technical description of kind of how it's hosted. So like it's a library, it's a website, it's a console application. And very optional, but if it's possible for other people to run your program, you should totally consider putting setup instructions. So the reviewer may try and do that setup, and that would get them to look at your application for longer, even if the instructions don't work perfectly. And if it does actually run and do stuff on the reviewer's machine, that's always very exciting. So that would be impressive. So commit history. So this next bit assumes some Git knowledge. So if it doesn't make sense, feel free to ask about it at the end. But if you have a commit history for the repo you'll have a commit history for the repo in GitHub, and you want it to show you working on it over time. So you want to have multiple small commits with clear commit messages that said what change you were doing in the message. And if you have a whole repo like that, it'll be really impressive to the interviewer. There are a lot of kind of conventions about how a commit history should be structured and how the messages should be written. And there's a lot of resources online about how to do that. So you could have a Google of that if you're not sure what to do. And lastly, it's also good if you can convince a friend or a project group to work together on the same project in GitHub. So if you have a shared repo that you're all working on, and especially if you're doing pull requests with reviews, that would be really, really cool to see. And it'll also be useful just outside of job applications because Git and GitHub are pretty big industry standards. So this is very likely how you will work on group projects in your job. So if you show up day one at work already knowing how to do a pull request, you'll have an advantage. Yeah. And that's it. That's all my tips. So the last thing I wanted to say is, you might be thinking, if I don't have all that stuff, does that mean my GitHub profile is bad and I shouldn't include it? I would say definitely no. My current personal profile doesn't have anywhere near all this stuff. And I did manage to get a job, and it had even way less when I was a grad. So this is just like extra credit stuff to work towards if you feel like kind of punching it up. But even if you have anything there at all, employers would definitely be interested to see it. So I would definitely recommend putting the link on your CV anyway. Cool. And that's the whole thing. Thanks very much for having me. So I'm going to try and open up to questions. Don't really know how to do it on Zoom, but worst case scenario, that is my email address there, and feel free to send me through something, and I'll try and remember to look at it. But yeah, for now, if you want to ask a question, I think you can just unmute yourself, or feel free to write it in the chat as well.
Hello, Caitlin.
Hey.
I was just asking about your personal programming journey. Having been in the industry for 7 years, do you find your day-to-day coding has changed since being just your first year of being a graduate to now, in terms of confidence or just knowledge? For example, at the moment, I find it takes quite a lot of effort to get a program, get a project working. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I maybe I don't get what you mean, but I think I get what you mean. And yeah, definitely, I would say my confidence has increased. I think I have a much better sense of if I can't get something to work, and it's really frustrating me, I don't take that personally anymore. I think when I was definitely at uni, I would think I can't get it to work because I'm bad at programming, kind of thing. And now I think I can't get it to work because the language design is annoying, or maybe the IDE design is annoying. A lot of the programming problems that people have, aren't actually it's not actually a failure of logic. It's just you're getting used to the new tool that somebody else designed, and you don't know exactly what was in their head when they wrote it and stuff. So yeah, that stuff is still frustrating, but I think a lot of grads, and certainly including myself, take it as a sign that maybe you're bad at programming. And I definitely don't think anyone thinks that anymore after you've been doing it for a few years. Yeah.
Sweet, thank you.
Cool. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah.
So I'll ask a question, if I may. So I completely agree with your comment about a GitHub profile, but occasionally, as part of COSC 345, I invite people in industry in Dunedin to come in and talk to the class. And recently they've been saying, I don't want to see a GitHub profile because it's full of people who have just joined a gazillion projects and they can't get much useful information out of it. Now we've got conflicting advice. My own opinion is that it's good, but people in industry in Dunedin are telling me, you know what, don't even bother. So what's your what's your comment on, is it a shift in philosophies? Is it what?
Yeah. Well, okay, here's my response question. When you say joined a billion projects, do you mean they forked an open source repo and now it's on their profile?
Yeah, so a lot of people will fork an open source repo, change a few things and leave it on their profile. And then they've got 50 things on their profile, and it's hard to tell which ones are forked and which ones are theirs and what their contributions have been and whether their pull requests have been accepted. Yeah,
okay. That is such a good point. And if I ever give this talk again, I'm going to edit that, because to edit the slides to include that, because there's a big distinction between So for anyone who isn't familiar with GitHub, like because the repos are public, you can see everyone else's repos as well, and like repos that are owned by companies and stuff like that. And you can make your own kind of personal copy of it, and that's called a fork. And then that will appear on your profile. So sometimes people do that so that they can make a change and then contribute it back. And that's all good. But yeah, if that's your approach, is to just take an existing repo and move it onto your profile, I would say that doesn't count because it wasn't programming that you did. So the interviewers want to see programming just that you did. And in fact, I would recommend to anyone, if you're applying for jobs and you have a bunch of profiles, if you have a bunch of repos on your profile that are just forked where you didn't make any change, you should like get them off, like clean it up so that the interviewer can see the stuff that you actually did. Yeah, what do you think of that as a distinction?
I think you're right. I guess maybe you can hide the repos you've forked and you haven't contributed to, but it's a balancing act, right? As an employer, you don't want to spend too much time digging through somebody's 50 repos to work out which ones they've done.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if they've had a pull request accepted into a piece of open source software, that's certainly something you want to know about.
Yeah, true. Yeah. So yeah, okay, maybe if you have the issue, if you have more than like random arbitrary number, but say 10 repos, maybe like crop it down to just the ones that you feel most proud of and made the most important contribution to. Yeah, that would be my advice. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to have clutter on there. Yeah. Okay, we have some coming through from chat. Anthony, let me know if I have to stop at any time. I know they have the COVID briefing at 3. So the first question in chat is, do you feel the gender difference plays a role in interview or application process in general? It's a hard question. I guess I don't want to get too deep into gender stuff, but I guess, yeah, my personal opinion is that like statistically it is kind of harder for women and for people of color applying for programming jobs. I hope that's not too spicy. Maybe take it out of the recording. But yeah, it's harder, but there are lots of really good interviewers out there and good teams and good companies. And I think that everyone, the industry at the moment is thinking really hard about that and trying to fix their processes so that it's equitable.
Definitely staying in the recording. If I may, if people are direct messaging Caitlin, note that she's logged in twice, and I think you want to address the capital C Caitlin, not the small c Caitlin.
But it's tricky because I'm actually looking at the chat window on the small c Caitlin.
Okay, so you want to chat.
Yeah.
You want to chat small c Caitlin.
Yeah, either Caitlin. Any Caitlin will respond. Yeah. Okay. Cool. But yeah, thanks for that. It is a big part of the interview process. I just didn't want to talk about it in this talk, I think. Yeah. Another question is, do you have to have all the experience preferred items on a job to apply for it? No, I would say if I have like 1 or 2 of the experience preferred items on a job and I think it sounds fun, I would apply for it. Especially if it's a junior role. Yeah, one or 2 is fine. Yeah, they'll probably care more if it sounds fun to you than if you've used those particular tools before. Yeah. But yeah, another great question. Yeah.
Anyone else? Either unmute or use chat.
Hello?
Oh, hello?
Oh, hi, sorry. I was wondering if I could ask a question about, like, in terms of applications. I don't know if you know about like the Summer of Tech internship stuff.
Yeah.
It has like area for you to attach a bunch of links about like a portfolio or like a LinkedIn profile along with like the GitHub stuff. Do you think it's worthwhile bothering with like a LinkedIn profile or like a portfolio? I don't really know what they mean by portfolio, but
Yeah. Okay. I would, okay. Well, okay, again, like just my personal opinion, maybe take it with a grain of salt. I don't think I've ever really used LinkedIn much in job application processes because it's just the same stuff as what's on people's CV. And yeah, so I would say LinkedIn is the lowest priority one of those. Portfolio, you could probably email them and ask for the official answer if you're confused, or yeah, if it's unclear. Sorry, but I believe that portfolio would be talking about like a website. If you've made a website, like I think it's a pretty common practice for people who do front end stuff to make their own website, and the website that they made is showing their skills, like like they used their front end skills to make cool buttons and things. So in that situation, GitHub repo is not as good because the GitHub repo doesn't have the visual element, like you can't see it. So yeah, that's a really good point of like, if the type of stuff you like to do is visual, like websites, then you can, yeah, absolutely host a website and then link to that. And I would probably call that a portfolio. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question?
yeah, no, thanks. That does make sense. Thank you.
Sweet.
And remember, if you're going to build a website and you're going to send the URL to people who want to employ you, you can check your logs to see if they've looked and how much of it they looked at.
Expert tips. Yes. Totally.
Okay, last chance to ask a question. No? I think we're done then, and I'd just like to thank Caitlin. These talks are always very well received, very useful, and it's great to have the recording this time to put up. So thank you so much.
Sweet. Thanks for having me.
Okay, ending the recording now.